Hello, everybody. James here. WSI, my guest this week. I always say this week. It's very, very staggered these weeks anyway. But he's been in the business for 40 years, one of the best trainers out there, and one of the stars of the Attitude Era among numerous other accolades is Al Snow. Welcome. I've been trying to get you for 2.5 years onto the show, man.
Have you really?
Yes, I have. I kept emailing, and you're like, yeah, we'll do it. And then
Yeah,
I
I'm
was talking to
sorry.
someone else. Chris was like, dude, he gets so many requests every day.
I do, yeah, I do. And the best thing to do is because now, somebody will contact me for something, and I go, look, can I check with my wife? So everybody assumes like I'm pussy whipped, just beat down by my wife. She runs the house, but it's because she's like my personal assistant because can't, I just can't keep track of it all and keep up with it. So I rely pretty heavily on her to keep me on schedule.
Speaking of keeping you on topic as well, I said before we've got over 100 questions in for you. I've got my
Sure,
own
yeah.
questions as well. I've got nearly
Mhm.
6 pages of stuff to run through. We've just got.
Okay.
We will not get to it all. I'm an over planner. I'm an over preparer.
Mhm.
But first off, I would like to not bring to your attention because I'm sure you know the wrestling world's lost a couple of big names in the last few weeks, and the first one is Droz. I think as we record
Oh
this last
yeah.
week or the week before, at age 54 of natural causes. I
Uh-huh.
was wondering if you could regale us with, what Darren was like as a person, some good Droz stories.
Darren was really a wonderful guy and an incredible athlete. And what happened, the accident and truly was just, it's an accident, and I think it brings home just you know, um, how awareness of the fact that every time one of these athletes step inside the wrestling ring, there is to some degree or another a percentage of a chance that somebody can suffer either a life-ending or life-altering injury. And but it never once that accident happened with Darren, it never stopped him from living his life. It never prevented him from just going and continuing and moving forward. And I think, Darren, uh, certainly could be a testament to what, people should understand what real courage is. I mean, he never gave up. He still went out and still, you'd see him photos of him smiling and having a wonderful life. And it's tragic. It's sad that, his life has come to an end at 54. But he certainly did have a really good life in spite of the challenges that he had to face.
Do you, when that happened, and obviously everyone knows what happened, there was an accident, he landed on his head, it was a power bomb from D'Lo that went wrong. When you
Mhm.
saw that or when you heard about it, does that sort of challenge what you're willing to do and take in the ring, at least for a short while, because it brings home the risks?
No, no, it doesn't. Not at that time because you don't focus on the risk. And I don't think anybody, still to this day really focuses on the risk. And you can't. I mean, because if you're walking in there focused on, that you may end up having some kind of an injury, then what you're inevitably going to do is you're going to try to protect yourself. And then in my experience, the more you try to protect yourself, the more you try to prevent things from happening, the more likely you've just increased the odds that it's going to occur. It's gonna be the case no matter what you try to do. And you can't perform like that. I mean, you've got to be confident, and that's where really training in the basics and the fundamentals can help to mitigate the chance, the risk of an injury like that occurring. You know, granted that was a very tragic situation, and it was between D'Lo and Darren, it just didn't work that night, and that was what took place. But you could be in there by yourself or doing the most simplest of moves, and then something goes wrong just the right way at the right time, and you really, suffer an injury. I mean, in the wrestling business, we always, you're going to get hurt. There's a difference between getting hurt and getting injured. Getting hurt is you're hurt. Getting injured means you can't function, you can't work, you can't make a living. And and those are two different things. So you're always trying between yourself and your opponent to make sure that somebody does not get injured.
Mm.
And the more you can be properly trained in and essentially the very basics, the very fundamentals, the more it will prevent that potentiality from happening.
And the other sort of most prominent passing in the wrestling business in the last few weeks is the Iron Sheik, and everybody's got an Iron Sheik story. I don't know how many people remember this, but Iron Sheik was actually a manager in the late '90s, managing Rikishi at
Yes.
one point. You've got to hit me with a couple of your best Iron Sheik stories.
That it's not my story, but it was a guy, a promoter in Boston. His name was Dan Marotti, and Dan Marotti unquestionably had the best Iron Sheik story that spanned, and I can't do it justice, but it literally spanned an entire day with the Iron Sheik that resulted in an auto accident where the Sheik apparently had the guy that was driving, he was the commish, and Sheik was uh, for whatever reason didn't like him the whole day, and the accident occurs. Sheik's in the front seat. The car's upside down, and Sheik is hanging. They're both, he and the commish are hanging in their seat belts upside down in the car, and the Sheik is punching the commish in the neck, going, "You tried to kill the Sheik, you tried to kill the Sheik, you son of a bitch." And he's hitting him upside down in the car. And then, the ambulance arrives, and it takes Sheik to the hospital. He's literally everybody, like, by the time Maradi gets there, everybody loves the Sheik. He's handing out 8x10s that he signed to the nurses and to the doctors, and he's getting special medicine
Oh,
from
is he?
from the nurses. He had just taken over the entire hospital. So I wish I could do it justice. Dan, like I said, unfortunately passed away recently, um, sometime in the past. And he was a good guy, and without a question or doubt, that was probably one of the greatest Iron Sheik stories I had ever heard.
Mm.
And but like I said, I couldn't possibly do it justice. It was an entire day with the Sheik that was just like a circus ride.
I don't know who sent this me or have heard it before, but someone said I once spent a great year with the Sheik 1 week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure. Yeah, yeah. spend a hell of a week in one night with the Sheik.
I'm actually going to skip about three questions. I'm going to bundle all the more modern wrestling kind of stuff into later
Okay.
in the episode. But for now, I want to bring to people's attention. You wrote a book a few years ago. I've read it, Self Help, the autobiography,
Uh-huh.
and I can't believe that you didn't spend every single page blasting Mick Foley on it.
Well, that would be one, what he would expect. Two, he'd probably be happy because that would draw attention to him.
Mhm.
And three, uh, you know, that was my way of getting back at him, was by not mentioning him at all, which I knew would drive him more crazy than if I did. So I always say, like, Mick, when we were wrestling, would, tell everybody in the locker room, "Oh, when I get done, I'm going to be a stand-up comic." And we'd all laugh. And now he is a stand-up comic and nobody's laughing. So,
What of all the, because you with Mick's books, obviously telling the
uh-huh.
stories at first, and you've done an interview since. What was the one best insult he gave to you? What was the one best insult you gave to him?
Uh, well, that's tough because that all started, uh, we started that in the car, and it was just a way to pass the time. And we made it like the equivalent of a boxing match. So it was like a verbal sparring match. And, I'd get him and I'd be like, "Ah, that was a knockout," or, "That's a standing eight," or, "You're in the ropes," and he'd fire back. and we had made the agreement that it would never go outside the car. Um, but I think because I love Mick, but the truth of the matter is he can dish it out, but he can't take it. So where it really changed was one day I'll never forget it. We were at Denny's in Philadelphia, and Bob Holly was riding with us. And I said, turned to Bob and I said, the last time we were here, Mick ordered pigs in a blanket, and the waitress brought him a photograph of his mom and dad in bed. And Bob just lost it. And I could, Mick got sour, and then that night he started, throwing the jokes at me in the dressing room, and then he would enlist the aid of Edge and Christian, and he would do the fake laugh, and then it took him from there. I mean, became obsessed. Where at the onset of the internet, WWF or WWE was dipping their toe into the chat rooms and things, and they have him on, and next thing I know, he's you know making jokes about me and that. And then like the night that I was like I'm in the hotel room watching I think it was the Slammies or something one night, and he's up there doing an acceptance speech, and he's doing Al Snow jokes as part of the things. And I went, good Lord, this has gone too far. And so then that was where I was like, you know what? I'm not going to play with you anymore. You can't, you don't play right. You can dish it out, but you can't take it. And I'm not going to be a part of it anymore. But I'm, everybody's like, do you get upset when he does that? Of course not. I don't. It brings attention to me. I mean, the more he talks about me, the more relevant I am, the more he puts me over. So, it doesn't bother me at all. In fact, fully expect him to do more. It disturbs me because it's a level of obsession that it borderline on like a sexual, you know what I mean? It's like, why are you that caught up in, making sure that you talk about me? But it is what it is. And, to be fair, like Mick and and I don't think that I'm speaking out of turn or putting myself over. That Mick and I had a really strong chemistry, on air chemistry, like other famous duos. I mean, it was easy for us to work together and to play off each other and be entertaining. And we were better together on camera, for doing it. So,
Do you know what?
you know,
You two were on camera so little in the 90s, 99
mhm,
specifically, and yet
uh-huh,
still people remember you as a duo. Like I think you went to like a
yes,
roller coaster in Vegas or something like that, tagged up
mhm,
and won and lost the tag titles, within a couple of weeks, and you're only a team for what, a month or two, but still people
yeah,
remember
yeah,
that.
uh-huh, yeah, yeah. And then the angle with the Rock and Mick's book, and that too. It was not really a very prevalent uh part of the run in WWE, but that it always seems like that is the one of the main things that people talk about. So it clearly, working together, it made an impression. People, were, really enjoyed it.
So we are going to go sort of pre WWE. We're going to go from the career, more or less chronologically speaking. But before I do, there's one more
Okay.
thing that I have to bring up because I agree with you, and a lot of people out there didn't agree with you when you made the statement at the time. You famously said in
What's
an
that?
old interview that Hulk Hogan is one of the greatest wrestlers ever because of the amount of money he drew.
Oh, unquestionably.
Now, quite a lot of people out there seem to disagree with that, and I
Well, I sure, yeah.
right, okay. Why don't you tell these people why they're wrong and Hulk Hogan is in fact one of the greatest wrestlers of all time?
Uh, because here's why. A wrestler's real job, is no different than a musician's. It's no different than a comedian's. It's no different than um, a actor, a movie actor's job. Uh, And what I mean by that is if you're in the entertainment business, okay, your job is to compete for the number one resource on the planet. It is the most valuable resource in the world. There's nothing that is more valuable, and there's nothing that's more expensive to get, and that is people's attention. Your job is not to go out there and just be a great wrestler. And that I learned over the years through experience, because I had always endeavored to go out there and just simply be, the wrestler's wrestler, to be a great wrestler. And what it is you're supposed to be a great attraction, is what you are. And there is a dramatic difference between the two. For instance, Arnold Schwarzenegger does not get paid to act. Arnold Schwarzenegger gets paid to make movies because an audience would pay to see them. That's why Arnold Schwarzenegger got paid. And Tom Cruise, same thing, and that's why movie actors have always been held in higher esteem than television actors, because for you to see a movie actor do the job, there's an investment of time, money, and effort on your part to go do it. Whereas a television actor, yeah, they do motivate you to watch them, but you just turn the channel and you can see them do that. And that the biggest challenge, especially, it has always been a huge challenge, but is the biggest challenge these days, is to motivate you to leave the comfort, safety, and security of your home, get in your car, drive, or take whatever transportation you take to get to a building. If you've driven, now pay to park, because everyone does that now. That's an extra bit of money.
Mhm.
And then pay a significant amount of money to enter the building. Pay for the opportunity to sit in a seat. Let's be honest, you don't want to sit in, around people you don't want to sit around. Okay, to pay for food at a concession stand, overpay for food at a concession stand you don't want to eat, to watch that performer do their job. That's a very, very tough job to do. It's very challenging. And at the end of the day, as far as from a wrestlers or entertainers standpoint, Hulk Hogan, without a question, right now was one of the most number one wrestlers in the world, because you know e- everyone, and I do mean everyone around the planet, if you say Hulk Hogan, they know who you're talking about, and that is, he's won the contest, he's won the game. He drew more money, and you can be the greatest performer, you can be the, as far as acting, you can be the most amazing actor on the planet, uh and yet if no one will buy a ticket to see your movie, guess what Hollywood's never going to do with you? They're never going to make a film with you in it. They're featuring you because they know you're not going to motivate an audience to give them a return on their investment. And the same with, you could be the, and I'm sure there are, because I mean, how many times have you watched Britain's Got Talent, America's Got Talent, these, all these shows, and then somebody comes out on that stage that you've never seen or never heard before and sings like the most incredible voice that you've ever heard, has so much charisma, but you've never heard of them. Why? Well, because they, you put them live in a concert, nobody will pay to go see them, you know, and it's called the wrestling business, and it is a business, and it is a business of drawing an audience to make money to pay the bills, and therefore the evaluation of success is not just on how comparable they are within the ring. And let's face facts, I mean, there's this absurd, and I mean, quite honestly, it's really an absurd notion that Hulk Hogan could not wrestle,
Yeah.
which is ridiculous.
Watch him in
Okay,
Japan. Man, that dude could go.
you have to understand, and I get it, because a lot of people, it's fans who think they know things. When I broke into the wrestling business, okay, in '82, And, Hogan came in, a few years before me. At that time, this business was a very closed, it, it was easier to be a man in the mafia than it was to become a professional wrestler. It was very protected, but protected meant not, telling people that wrestling's fake. Everybody had known wrestling's fake for decades. It was not allowing just anyone to get in it. And the reason why is because it takes literally an entire locker room to build a town, and it takes one guy on the show to ruin it. And it was very difficult to get in. And so, Hogan showed up and a noted, what we in the wrestling business call a hooker, not a prostitute, but a catch wrestler, Hiro Matsuda, literally broke his ankle the first time he showed up, and then sent him on his way to see if he came back. And the reason that's important is because when somebody trained you, they accepted responsibility for you in the wrestling business. It was like a apprenticeship. And if you now do something that gets you heat within the wrestling business, or you do something that violates any tenets, or you hurt business somewhere, it not only do you suffer, the guy that brought you in does, because they feel that he was responsible, should have taught you and prevented what occurred. And when this is your sole means of income and livelihood for you and your family, you don't like to take that risk on just anyone. So, and when you do, and I still operate like this today, when you do, you make it clear that, hey, you're carrying my reputation around. And now I'm going to make sure that you are as successful as possible, because that's only going to make me look better. But I'm certainly not going to let you risk my livelihood or my reputation on, by you making a mistake. So, Matsuda's going to go out of his way to make sure that he knows how to wrestle. But the reason that Hulk Hogan didn't wrestle was because the audience didn't pay to see him do that. The audience paid Hulk Hogan to see Hulk Hogan be Hulk Hogan. That's what they wanted, and that's what he gave them. And, it's like Steve Austin. If you go back and watch Stunning Steve, as Steve Austin against like Ricky Steamboat, he's amazing. I mean, he was really, really a very good and very capable wrestler. Now you go forward and you watch him as Stone Cold Steve Austin. Well, he had 5 or 6 moves, and most of that was punching and kicking. Why? Well, because if you're a beer drinking, ass kicking redneck who flips off his boss, how are you going to wrestle? You're going to be out there doing switches and reversals and takedowns and escapes and counters, or are you going to go out there and just stomp a mud hole in somebody? You get what he sold you, Stone Cold Steve Austin, so he wrestled like Stone Cold Steve Austin. But you never hear that debate of people saying, well, Steve Austin couldn't wrestle. Well, he didn't. When he became Stone Cold Steve Austin, Stunning Steve never showed back up again. But any moment and any time, Stunning Steve could come right back in, but that's not what the audience paid to see. And that's what it comes down to. And Hulk Hogan did an amazing job of being Hulk Hogan and carrying a company, at that time, and made not only himself, but a lot of people a lot of money, not just he and Vince McMahon, a lot of the wrestlers that were on Hulk Hogan's shows, if they were typically making, I don't know, $1,000 a night, on a regular show, because Hulk Hogan was on the show and the place was sold out, they all made 1,500 or 2,000 from where they were on the card. And that's how that really works, and that's why the business operates the way it does, is because, uh, and why we used to have I don't know what you would call it, turn of phrase, or an action that we used to take, where if you were on Hulk Hogan's show, or and I used to go up and tell Steve Austin a lot of times, I'd be, hey man, I really thank you for the house, because he's the guy that drew the house. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it, you know. And he was like, "Thanks for doing that, because if you hadn't done it, I wouldn't be making as much money as I am making right now. And it's all due to you. Thanks for having me on your card, because if I weren't on this particular show, you know." And back in the day in the '80s, you know, WWF was running A and B towns, and some weekends they were running A, B, and C towns. You know, so Hogan was on the A and B towns, and if you weren't on his card, if you were on that C town, you're not going to make nearly the same amount of money as you were going to if you were working on one of the A or B towns that Hogan was on,
Yeah.
because it was
You
going to be a much bigger house.
you could be on like the Catholic Youth Centre in Scranton or wherever it is, or the Cape Cod place. Just
Right.
sort of half getting on what you were talking about before with Steve Austin, Stunning Steve.
Yeah.
I know you said beforehand, before we were recording, you're not the best on years and everything like that, but can you recall like a
Right.
vague time on when the majority of wrestlers in a given locker room were less interested in working on their characters and portraying them on TV and more interested in chasing a star rating? Do you remember more or less when that shift
When
happened?
that shifted,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be slightly after the Attitude Era ended. It had already begun prior to that. I really, because we had talked about this last night, the turning point in wrestling kind of was, I use as a guidepost, is kind of WrestleMania 3. Uh, one, the what we had discussed just a moment ago about how difficult it was to be a professional wrestler, and how closed the door was. Uh, that changed, and it changed. Quite honestly, the most prominent change was the Monster Factory in New Jersey with Larry Sharp. You know, I'm not, you know, Larry literally kind of opened the doors, was like, "Hey, you got the money, I'll train you," type of thing. Where before it was like, you know, you had to fight, and I mean, genuinely had to fight and crawl and, you know, beg and plead to get somebody to be willing to do it. He was, here we go. And, you know, he was fortunate because wrestling was so hot, and he was right across the river from the center of the media universe in New York. So he got a lot of mainstream publicity, which helped to drive a lot of business, you know, for his training facility. And so you understand, like, training facilities for wrestling were not prolific back then. You know, Vern had you know, Vern Gagne, the wrestling promoter in Minneapolis, he had a ring in his barn. You know, I remember going down for a tryout with Ole and Gene Anderson, and, you know, they would, if you made it through the tryout, the way they trained you was they took you to the local YMCA where there was pads, you know, to teach you how to wrestle.
How much did they
Because so,
charge you, by the way? I have to ask. How much did Ollie and Gene
uh,
charge you?
it was 500, you know, $250 for the tryout.
Mhm.
Um, and so, uh, uh, you know, so there was not a proliferation of schools. Then they weren't very prolific. You know, Kowalski had one, and he was just about the only one that had a full time school, other than Larry Sharp when he had opened the Monster Factory. So that door got blown wide open to the point where Larry was going around selling franchises to other wrestlers of the Monster Factory. I remember Charlie Fulton and Marion, Ohio bought, you know, bought into a franchise of the Monster Factory. And so that changed dramatically, you know, and to this day, it is far too easy to gain entrance into the wrestling business. Um, you know, the way I ended up buying OVW was because I met one of my partners, Chad Miller, a great guy, and was on the executive director of the Kentucky Boxing Wrestling Commission. The way I met him was earlier that year, a young guy out in Oklahoma had died from an injury he'd suffered in the ring. He had gotten a spine buster and hit his head and had went into a coma. And this was not the first guy that this had happened. And, you know, I got to thinking about it, and, you know, seated in a lot of independent around the world, not just in the United States, around the world. Okay. A lot of independent wrestling locker rooms, looking around the locker room, and one, no ifs, ands, or buts. This is an aesthetic cosmetic business, and meaning that when you walk through that curtain, physically, visually, you better be able to convey to an audience an ability to believe that you can whip somebody's ass, that you make your living in a competitive combat situation. Well, let's face it, there are a lot of people that are in this business right now that do not even remotely look like that. Okay. But I get it. That's fine. I'm not judging as far as a physical appearance, but again, let's make no mistake. This is a physical appearance business. Okay. It's not, I didn't make it that way. So you can sit there and moan and bitch about, oh, you'd be victim about, oh, he's body shaming. No, I'm not. That's how it works. I didn't make the rules. You know, I don't care how you look. Here's my problem. My problem is that you're physically in no actual real condition to safely and respectably go in the ring and perform on a level that allows you to protect yourself and your opponent. That's my issue. That's my problem. Because regardless of what you might think as far as, oh, wrestling's fake, it is still very much a very intense athletic endeavor that you're going out and performing. And now you're going to do it. And in about 8 minutes, you're going to want to try to do that cool spot you saw recently on your New Japan video, or this fantasy of this spot you saw the Usos and Roman Reigns do on Raw. And you're going to want to do it. And you're too blown up to safely and effectively do it. And one of you might potentially, again, back when we had the conversation about Darren Drozdov, suffer a life-altering or life-ending injury. Okay. And it's insulting that you think that you can come in and you can be a part of this profession, because the first part of professional is profession. Okay. And then you don't have to genuinely invest any time, money, or effort into yourself, but you're somehow unrealistically expecting that, number one, a promoter is going to do that with you. And number two, that the fans, the audience, which is really the biggest sin, are investing their time, money, and effort to see you and get a certain experience that you can't offer them because you don't even invest the time, money, and effort in yourself. You don't go to a gym. Hell, you don't even know a guy named Jim, you know? And so it was insulting. And then when I really got to thinking about it, because in the United States, we have numerous vocations that require a license to perform. If you're a beautician, you're a barber. My wife is a licensed masseuse, okay, but if you even want to be a mortician, you have to have a license. In order to acquire those licenses and those other licensed vocations, you have to let's lay it out. You've got to go to a state accredited training facility for, even if you just want to cut hair, all right, or you want to work on dead people. And what's the risk of you injuring a dead person? Who cares? They're dead. All right. You got to go to a state accredited school, be taught by a state accredited approved teacher who has a certain level of experience and understanding of the information they're disseminating. You have to complete a certain number of state required hours. You have to then complete a certain number of resident hours, meaning you have actual hands-on experience performing the work. And then and only then do you get to take a test to get a license to pursue that vocation. In professional wrestling within the United States, we've got numerous athletic commissions, one in Missouri, one in Louisiana, one in Kentucky, one in Maryland. We got them all over the country. The requirement for you to be a licensed professional wrestler is, in most states, you just take a physical and then you pay your money. You're done. That's it. There are no standards. There's no way to, and now within the wrestling business itself, there are no standards. Okay. And I'll get to the other part of the question here in just a second, because this does it has a certain amount of gravity to it. So regardless of whether people want to agree with me or not, I genuinely don't care. Everything I'm stating is based off of facts. You are going to go in and try to pursue a vocation that clearly is an athletic endeavor that requires a certain level of athletic, not just physical fitness, but athletic fitness. Okay. You need to have the proper training and understanding of the skills that you've acquired and how to best utilize them, not just to elicit an emotional reaction, but to physically protect yourself and your opponent at all times while you're in that ring performing, to mitigate the always present risk of you suffering some horrific injury. That's just, it's a fact, that's reality. And you don't. Anyone with any level of experience can open up a wrestling school. And let's face it, in the UK and here in the United States, tons.
Mm-hmm.
There are millions, there are thousands of them. And anyone can do it in any building as long as they get a building, they put a ring in it, and then there's no set amount of training that has to be done, and that's leading to the degradation of the wrestling business. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Let's not even get into the fact that you're not being really taught the real skills of how to genuinely perform the art of how to work a wrestling match. Hell, most of them don't even know what the definition of the term work is anymore. Because I hear them all the time go, oh, that guy's a really great worker. So-and-so's a really great worker. Why are they a great worker? Well, they can do stuff. They can go. That's not a worker. That's an athlete. That's a performer. The difference between an athlete, a performer, and a worker is this. A worker is someone, because a term of work, so we are clear, a term of work is a con, a sham. It is to make someone believe a lie, something that's not real. There is only, no ifs, ands, or buts, there is only one thing that is not real, that is a lie in wrestling. And that is that outcome we already know before we walk in that ring. So my work is to convince you that my intent from the moment I walk through that curtain is to attempt to win. And your ability to believe in me, who I am, and the fact that I'm out there constantly trying to do that and not lose because of the consequence of it, that's what you're paying to believe in, not in the moves. Okay. And that's where that evaluation of, well, Hulk Hogan, he wasn't a great worker, he wasn't a great wrestler. Bullshit. He was fantastic because you paid your money. You could, for the moment you walked in that building, believe in Hulk Hogan and believe in what he was attempting to do. And if people can say what they want, but the facts state themselves. If you couldn't have done that, there wouldn't have been thousands of people on top of thousands of people that would have paid to see him. It wouldn't have been a Saturday night's main event on a mainstream broadcast network in the United States. There wouldn't have been movies that he were in. Granted, most of them were terrible, but
I was going to say, how could you say Three Ninjas at Mega Mountain was not Oscar worthy?
I know, yeah, it was really spectacular. What a piece of celluloid art. But let's face it. I mean, he was great at what he did. And we have those standards. So that WrestleMania 3, that started to change. Okay. And the entrance into the building, into the wrestling business, just the doors are still to this day wide open. And again, are degrading the business itself. One time, getting into the wrestling business, like I had mentioned before, was, it was easier to be a man than mafia. And it was kind of like the NFL or an elite soccer club in, Britain. Like, not just anybody can walk on the field and just do it. Well, now, I always reference this monster.com commercial that really epitomizes professional wrestling. You're watching two tennis players. They're at the top of their game and they're playing this game of tennis. It's spectacular. They're volleying back and forth. And then all of a sudden, two people are on the court with them and it becomes like a doubles game. You're like, what's going on? Now, two more people. Now the game gets completely fucked. And then the camera pulls back and you see people in the stands all running and getting down on the court. And that essentially is what happened to wrestling. All of the people that were in the stands now have a means of egress to go right out of the stands over the rail and they get into the ring. And the wrestling business has suffered for it. And that changed at WrestleMania 3. Now, where it also changed was for another reason, and that was at that point, the war was kind of over. The war of where Vince supposedly destroyed the territories, and Vince didn't go out and destroy the territories. What Vince did was Vince basically gave all of the workers that were in those territories a greater opportunity with a greater platform to make more money. And they all jumped at it and they all left. There was a mass exodus of workers from the territories to Vince. And as such, all of those territories now were bereft of workers. And there is a distinct difference between a worker and a wrestler. Okay. There had always been the saying in the wrestling business that, wrestlers don't make money, because they don't. And you can put a pair of trunks and a pair of boots on anybody, put them in the ring, and they call themselves a wrestler. And let's face it, we see examples of that all the time on independent shows to this day. Okay. But a worker, someone, because it's the old, hey, anybody can paint a house, but not everybody can paint a picture. There's a big difference. Anybody can do a paint by numbers painting. Not everyone can do a painting that sits in a museum that evokes an emotional response just by viewing it. That takes an artist. So everybody can be a painter, not everybody can be an artist. And everybody can be a wrestler, not everybody can be a worker. So no workers. The dismantling of the territories, which were where wrestlers could, wrestlers could go and make a living, started to dissolve. And so people that were now making their way into the wrestling business, if you weren't already in the door, it was going to really start to become more of a challenge for you to really make wrestling, be in the real wrestling business, have this as your vocation. You're going to become, a guy who works which there's nothing wrong with that. You're going to become a guy that works another job, but you're going to pursue your wrestling only on the weekends. But it's not your sole means of income. It's not your sole means of survival. So your mindset's going to be completely different. It's not going to be the same. No question. That shifted. So now the onus wasn't on, because, I'd been in the business, I tell guys all the time, 12, 14 years. I'd walk back from my match. No one ever asked me, hey, how was your match? Didn't care. That question never came up. Number one question was always asked is, what's the house? How many people are out there? What's it look like, kid? That was all they cared about, because that meant the more people that were out there, the more money they ate, the more they could support their family, the more they could eat, they could feed themselves. And that was why nobody ever asked how good somebody's match was, because they knew that if you were on the show, people trusted you and that you could deliver, and that otherwise you wouldn't even have been on the card. It was not a question of how good it was, and but then that shifted. That changed, because now the onus was no longer on, hey, I need to do this to survive. It was now, I do this and I enjoy it, and it's a dream. And look, I work Monday through Friday, and I do this on Friday night and Saturday night and occasionally Sunday. So now it's now all about. It started out because WrestleMania 3 was the place where it really, we had this conversation last night. I pointed out, and the only reason I pointed it out is because I saw the influence on the wrestlers within the business, because no matter what anybody thinks or says, the wrestling business has and will always be the wrestler's business. It's not Vince's, it's not a promoter's, it's not a writer's, it's the wrestlers. So if you're watching Raw and it sucks, that's because the wrestlers ain't doing what they're supposed to do. Period. Once they walk through that curtain, there's nothing you can do to help them, and there's nothing you can do to hinder them. They are completely responsible for you being entertained and retaining your attention. So, they can make, promoters and writers can make it more difficult for a wrestler to, accomplish their goals, but doesn't make it impossible. So at WrestleMania 3, the newsletters were, Dave Meltzer's newsletter was starting to gain promise. And let's make something 100% clear. I have no heat with Dave Meltzer. I don't care about, and I honestly congratulate Dave Meltzer for being able to make a six-figure income off of a business that most people can't even survive at.
Quite a
Good for
worker.
you.
Yeah, good worker.
Yeah, I mean, he is, because he has worked everyone into believing a fan, because he is. He's a fan. And look, I am too. But the difference between myself and Dave Meltzer is I've actually done this. Okay. I've done literally every single job there is in the wrestling business. I've put up the ring, I've torn it down, I have, drove the truck, I have wrestled, I have refereed, I have commentated, I have, promoted everything. Not taking anything away from Dave. He is probably one of the most well-informed, fans that you'll ever want to meet. Okay. Plethora of information. But there is a distinct difference between information and knowledge. In order to acquire knowledge on any topic, you have to have information and a commensurate amount of experience to go with that, to have an understanding, a real knowledge of what it is the topic is, period. No matter what it is. That's like, I love medical shows. I can't get enough of them. I love anything that has doctors on it. I watch, I Google my own symptoms. I read the New England Journal of Medical Science every single week. That is like the Wrestling Observer of medicine. Okay. If I get sick or I get hurt, I'm not going to go to the doctor and tell him how to fix me, because he's a doctor. Because you can go to medical school for whatever your specialty is for a number of years, 6 to 8 years. The minute you graduate, you are not a doctor. You're not a licensed physician. You have to complete a certain number of hours of residency before you ever get your actual medical license to perform as an actual doctor. That means they know you could have spent years acquiring information, but until you get the experience, the supervised experience, you really don't have the knowledge to be a doctor. Same with professional wrestling. So Dave Meltzer, and I know I'm taking a very long time to answer this question, but it's a pertinent question, and it affects what the wrestling business is today. And that in Dave Meltzer, the newsletters were starting to become more prominent because the internet wasn't, as like it is now. There was an access to information and opinion, and real, true, hardcore fans could, voice their opinion and their ideas, and so it's complete, and that's fine. It's a great forum for that. Where it started to have a problem, and that's where this started. It was in 1983, where Dave declared that Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage had the best match on the show. And look, I'm not taking anything away from their match. I loved it. I thought it was amazing when I watched it. And he's absolutely right. It was an incredible match. Was it the best match on the show? Well, from a fan standpoint, sure. Maybe you thought one of the other matches was. I have no problem with that. But from a wrestler's standpoint, if I'm on that card, Hogan and Andre had the best match on the show, because Hogan and Andre drew the house. I hate to break it to you, Savage and Steamboat didn't. And what happened was, because of that, literally now within the business itself, that's now held as that's the case. You hear wrestlers going, Savage and Steamboat had the best match on the show. You understand that from your viewpoint, it should be that Hogan and Andre did. And now, as a young wrestler, I'm watching all these guys go out there and they are aspiring to be Savage and Steamboat. No longer is anyone aspiring to be Hogan and Andre, and that hurts the business, because they're not reliant on the business paying their bills. They're not relying on it feeding their family. So now they're aspiring to just simply get a critical acclaim, not an actual effort to do what the real wrestling business is, which is be an attraction that draws as massive an audience. I mean, go turn on Peacock, the wrestling, WWE network, go to any of those interviews, and you'll hear the younger guys from like when they broke in the 90s or the 2000s, and you'll hear them all have, talk about a feud or an angle with a particular wrestler, and they'll be like, oh yeah, it was a great match. It was a great match. And you'll go listen to anybody that broke in the 70s or the 80s, and you'll hear them say, "Yeah, we drew a lot of money. We had some sold out houses." That's the mindset that has dramatically changed, and that's the mindset that literally to this day is undermining the wrestling businesses and preventing these young performers from having the option and the ability to pursue it as a vocation because there are so few places that they can do it on a regular basis because everyone in it is now, and it's evolved to the point now where the wrestlers are no longer even performing for the audience. They're performing for each other. But that's why they are so scared and so worried that they're going to make a mistake, that they're going to blow a spot. So they sit in the back, and don't get me wrong, I don't care what you call before you go out there, but they call it and they rehearse it mentally in their heads to the point where they go into the ring and they perform it because they're afraid that someone's going to notice they forgot something or they flubbed something or they made a mistake. And the truth of the matter is the only people that would ever possibly potentially notice it are the ones that are backstage watching it. The audience isn't going to because they don't know what's supposed to happen anyways. So that means you're performing for them. You're not performing for the paying audience. And that's a shame. And you're also performing to impress someone who is going to simply write a report about your performance and tell everybody about how good you are or how bad you are. And you're now relying in basing your performance on the opinions of someone who's never done it. And that all
I
shifted at WrestleMania 3.
you see, this is exactly why I asked you this, because I knew I was going to get a long answer, and I wanted a long answer
And
to it as
I
well. Because
apologize. I
no, no,
mean,
no, it's an important question, and it
what
needs,
is, and I
yeah,
need it. I want to go into detail because people are going to take it out of context.
hmm
They're going to assume that they think they know what I'm talking about. And that's why I really try to go into a detailed explanation as to how I arrived at that conclusion, and because again, keep in mind, you can think whatever you want about me and my career and, say whatever. I've been doing this for 41 years. Okay. 41 years. I've done it on every level. I started in the territories. I've done everything and anything. Have I always done it well? No. Have I made mistakes? Absolutely. Could I have done things better? Could I have, if I knew then what I know now, had a totally different, would have capitalized on opportunities much more. The point is, I've got the one thing that an immense amount of that most people don't have experience. And I'm not afraid to state my opinion about what is, where the problems are and how to make them better. And the only reason that I'm stating those is because I genuinely love the wrestling business and I want to see it survive. You think what you want, and there's the big move. We'll talk. Because you wanted to ask the 4
hmm
questions later,
yep, yep.
and this applies to that, of this myth, this complete utter bullshit uh fable that these everyone wants to tell themselves, oh, the wrestling business has changed. It's changed and different now, which is complete and utter horseshit. It is. That's like telling me that magic magic shows, magicians changed. No, they haven't. They've evolved, they've grown, they've, become much more sophisticated because your audience has become much more sophisticated. But intrinsically, the one basic precept of a magic show is that the magician is up there trying to convince you that he's altering reality or defying the laws of physics. That doesn't change. He's still selling you exactly the same thing as what he was selling you during the vaudeville times back in the 30s and then 20s. That never changed. Professional wrestling in 1900 was selling an audience on the competitive finish, that the outcome was not predetermined, that it had gravity and consequence, that you're not a wrestler, you're a competitive prize fighter, no different than a boxer or an MMA fighter. No different. That hasn't changed. An audience is still buying a ticket to believe in only and tune into the TV only to believe in that one concept.
Do you know
You can bullshit your stuff all you want, but it has not changed.
there's apparently news clippings out there from the 1880s talking about pro wrestling as pro
Yes.
wrestling that we understand now, not as in a competitive
Yeah.
contest. So I mean,
Yes.
it's always
And
been the same.
that's the other big myth or misnomer of, oh, they now know it's bull. They've always known it's bullshit. The reason that they were, they would buy a ticket and by the thousands, grown adults. Go back and watch YouTube, and you'll see, the vast majority of the audience were adults. Still to this day, contrary to what your popular believe, the vast majority of an audience at a live event are adults. Okay, and why would they buy a ticket? Well, because the performers, the workers, were able to allow the audience to believe in that one concept, and that there was a consequence to the win and the loss. And at no given time, kayfabe's dead. No, it's not. That was a respect for your audience. Kayfabe was only a respect for your audience, and it was never to insult them or make them feel stupid for spending their money and believing in you.
Mhm.
That was it. And there was an unspoken agreement that, hey, we know, and we know but we know you don't want us to tell you that and you know that we won't tell you, and we have this agreement so we can all go and enjoy it for what it is. And we're going to get our money's worth. We're going to be able to, because, this is how important it is to realize that your job is to motivate this guy who has a wife and he has a couple kids, to motivate him to leave. And hey, he can't just come, you know what I mean? He can't come by himself. He's not a bachelor anymore. I want to go. I want to go watch wrestling. Shit, I got to take the kids. I got to take the wife. Well, that's it's, let's just say it's for easy math. It's 10 pounds, you know, 10 quid to
Sorry,
go
most of
watch
the
it,
people watching are American. It's
or
fine.
$10, it's 10. Well, that's 40. You know what I mean? Well, by the time he pays for his kids, you got to feed them because the little monsters always eat. So, you got to feed the kids, then you got to buy merch. He spent 70 or 80 to just go and forget, just to be entertained. And, 70, 80 doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot for him. And, you know, he doesn't want to have to sit there and go, God, man, I'm going to have to pay the power bill late because I spent the 80 to come here. He wants to sit there and completely forget and just to truly believe in who you are and believe in why you're doing it so he can care whether or not you win or lose. He's not there to evaluate your match. He's not there to go, oh, yeah, they did that spot at this. Oh, that's a rest hold. He doesn't care about that. And 98% of the fan base don't. It's the 2%, the minor vocal minority, the little niche audience that now everyone, every wrestler, every wrestling promotion, all try to market strictly to that. And yet, Mr. and Mrs. Tesco, we don't care about them. But you know what? Mr. and Mrs. Tesco are the majority of the population. Mr. and Mrs. Walmart are the majority of the population. And they don't go on the internet and check websites. They don't watch this particular interview. They don't read a newsletter. They don't care. They want to turn the channel, see somebody on that screen that captures their attention, makes them want to live vicariously through that particular person, and then take them on a ride that makes them forget about their everyday workaday life. Period. Hulk Hogan was able to do that. Steve Austin was able to do that. The Rock was able to do that. You want to be the indie darling, and that's fine. It's an art. It's subjective. You're free to do whatever you want, you know. But the real objective of any wrestler should be to come into this business and to be as successful and make as much money as you possibly can, to create even more opportunities to go and do on even grander scales, and to make a difference in the wrestling business uh, via the business itself, which is to become an attraction, a real star, and draw money. And you're never going to do that as long as you're endeavoring to only perform for the wrestlers in the back. and for someone who's going a fan, again, just a fan, who's going to write a report and give you some critical claim that's going to pat you on the back and give you praise. Because let me tell you something, a pat on the back is only 2 feet higher than a kick in the ass.
So there you go. That is half an hour's worth of probably some of the best advice of
For one question, half an hour
for
answer.
one
Yeah.
question. But damn it, that's what I was hoping for. So that's perfect. We're going to go with fan questions for the most part for the second half of this interview, and I'm going to get through as many as I can. And the
Sure,
first
yeah,
one.
and I'll try to be as succinct as I
No,
can.
no, you don't have to be. Be as thorough as you need to be. Sunview has asked, was Al's match against Kerry Von Erich at the Chase in St. Louis in 1982 his first ever televised match? And if not, what were his earliest television matches? And who were they against?
Actually, that was I had one other match prior to that, like two weeks prior to that, May 11th of 1982. My very first match ever was a 2-ring over the top rope battle royal, 20-man over the top rope battle royal in Springfield, Ohio. And then 2 weeks later, I was out at the Chase, and the very first match I ever had and first televised match was with Kerry Von Erich. Yeah, that day. And because you entrance into the business and to learn it, you came in as a job guy, and the term, so that everybody understands what a job guy is. Not even the wrestlers know some of these terms anymore. Back in the day, you as a wrestler, if you were in the territory itself, where you made your money was on the live events. The wrestling on TV was considered a commercial because you're the product, and you were never paid for TV. Um, you were paid when you went on the live event. Even if you lost on TV, it wasn't called doing a job; it's called doing a favor because it's always expected to be returned back to you if circumstances change. And even if you lost regularly on TV, you were on TV. That meant that your name on the poster at a live event was a factor in how many people showed up. So you got a paid percentage of the gate. Um, but if you weren't making money off of the live events, you were brought in strictly just for TV. It was not an opportunity. It was hence a job. You were performing a task. And that's where the term job guy or doing the job came from. And you were paid that day, like if they did 3 weeks of TV, if you had 3 matches, you were paid 25 to 40 or, whatever for each individual match that you did because you performed a job, a task for each individual thing. And even to where some of the top guys, if you made them look really good, really put them over, would pay you out of their own pocket, money and basically, hey, thanks, kid. And they'd give you an extra 50 or $60, give you a bump because of the fact that you made them look even better to be able to draw much more, at an event.
Can I ask you this then? So obviously jobbers and job guys, and that's the more pejorative term. Of the
Yeah.
enhancement guys, who were basically career enhancement guys, who did you think did the best in their role?
Probably, and those guys were not called jobbers or job guys. They were called carpenters.
Mm-hmm.
And you need carpenters in the wrestling business. So carpenters were guys that you could build a house with, but you couldn't draw one with. They were missing, they were great, they were solid, they were believable, but they just were missing that little something that would allow them to draw a house. And a guy like George South, I think, probably is one of the more, preeminent ones that come to mind as far as, he's just such a, he was a, perpetual carpenter. But he, did such a great job. I mean, he was, and then in recent times, like Funaki was, in that role for a long time. And Funaki was the gateway guy for WWE. There was always a gateway guy, meaning there was a guy that the promoter knew if you can't have a good match with this guy, you can't have a good match.
Like Johnny
But he was also
Rods or
there.
Barry Horowitz
Yeah,
or something
Johnny
like that.
Rods. Yeah. And they were also a guy that, that the promoter also knew it was a test. It wasn't just to see if you could have a good match, like a good, solid, believable match. It was to see if you knew how to be a star, and a lot of guys fail that test because they show up and they go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show this, promoter I can I could do stuff. And they know you can. They know you can wrestle because if they didn't think you did, you wouldn't be there. Okay. What they're really testing to see is if you know how to do business. You've got a Barry Horowitz or a George South or a Funaki, and they're at the very bottom of the card. They want to see if you know how to go out there and elevate yourself and use that guy to make yourself look better. Or are you going to go out there and try to have a competitive match with this guy, which means that you're either bringing yourself down to his level or bringing him up to yours. And if you don't know how to do that, then if they see potential in you, the best that you can hope for is they're going to send you to the developmental to not learn how to wrestle, but to learn how to be a star, learn how to be an attraction that they then in turn will be able to have a return on their investment. Um, you know, but if you don't, inevitably what you're going to end up doing is going out there and you're going to blow your chance because you're going to try to focus more on what you do and not how you look.
The rest, I've just discovered that my printout here has decided to now print out all the names of the people who submitted these questions in very light pink, and I can't read the names. So I'm sorry,
Great.
everybody, for who submitted the questions. You'll know it's you because I've asked it. I'm going to move on now to WWF, and this fella says, really want to know more about the Avatar character, and I'm going to add to this. More specifically, do you remember how you came to the attention of the WWF and your first meeting with Vince?
Sure. I had gotten an opportunity with Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and met JR there, and Jimmy, and I love both those guys have been there. I owe them the world. I mean, they were big proponents for me and spoke up for me, and put their name and reputation on me, and that meant a lot. And I had a great run in Smoky Mountain, and um, it was around the time of my birthday in July that Eric Bischoff literally out of nowhere reached out to me. Well, he didn't. It was Jeremy Borash.
Hmm.
That whole thing was very convoluted, so that's a whole other story. But
It's in the book, though, isn't it?
I believe it is, yeah.
There you go. Buy the book,
And
self-help.
buy the book. And so they invited me down to Atlanta for a dark tryout match. And I was like, oh, great. And then all of a sudden, JR calls me like a couple days later, and and they invite me to come to Stanford, not for a tryout match, just come to Stanford, want to meet with Vince. And I'm like, oh, okay. And um, I go, look, I got to be honest now. I've got to go. Bischoff has contacted me about a tryout match. Nope, go. Hear what they got to say, then come here. I'm like, okay. So, what two different worlds? I mean, just and I won't go into a whole bunch, but I go to Atlanta, do the tryout match, fly to Stanford, get picked up, go out to Titan Towers. JJ Dillon and Lisa Wolf, who was there at that time, they take me around and tour all of the TV studio, tour all of Titan Towers, and then I sit and talk with Vince for 2 hours in his office, and he offers me a contract right then and there. And I'm like, well, I just want I went and had a tryout match with, WCW with Eric Bischoff, and goes up, hear what they have to say, and then, and then let me know. So a couple weeks go by and one thing leads to another. And I basically signed with WWF. Vince and I talk, and and I know what Vince was wanting to do, which was he wanted to capture the popularity, and he had tried several other characters like Aldo Montoya's Man of War, and
Mm.
um, the popularity of the Power Rangers at that time, and the popularity of uh, Mortal Kombat. We even had a conversation. He was talking about how Mortal Kombat had a live tour, and they had Radio City Music Hall, and it sold out like 7 days straight at Radio City Music Hall or something. And that was the inspiration for the idea of the character. And then and I said, well, mask guys in your territory, I mean, they don't really, they're not main event guys, or don't have an identity. And And that's when he like kind of was like, well, you'll carry the mask to the ring and then put it on type of thing. I was like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do that, but
Mm.
and so and this is it's so weird because we had this conversation and then he calls me up again. And he goes, oh, we're going to do all these vignettes to introduce your character and help people understand it. I go, great. And that'll really help, you know, make people understand what's going on. And it like he described literally, if you remember all of the vignettes they did with Glacier in
Yes,
WCW,
there was like 6 months worth
I'm
as well.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, I cannot tell you how much that was exactly what he had described to me of what he was going to do for this Avatar character, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like in October or November of that year, I think it was October. Oh, you need to be in Winnipeg. You're going to be live on Raw debuting Avatar. Like what? The mask didn't fit right, and you've got to understand too. Like I just had came from Cornet in Smoky Mountain, and I had gotten to it a point where I could stand on the ring apron in the middle of the rope. I could springboard up, turn in the midair, land on the top rope, and moonsault into the ring. I mean, I'd do 450s. I could do, anything. I was really at the height of physical ability. I get there. Well, it's real rope. It's not cable. It's very loose. They don't, and nobody did anything off the top rope because these were the old Saturday night main event rings that were really tight, really stiff, and none of the wrestlers really did anything off the top rope. And the ropes were just treacherous. I mean, and so one of the things that I, could utilize was gone. But then the other thing is because what they don't tell you is they don't give you direction. They don't tell you what they want. You've got to just kind of figure it out. So I had a gimmick that if I knew then what I know now, I could have taken and capitalized on the opportunity to a much greater degree. But at that time I had been a heel for the large portion of my career. The run in Smoky Mountain, I was a very smart ass chicken shit, smarmy, condescending heel that, and being a heel, truly being a real heel is, where my job is to get the baby face over. And so I can get heat. And, now all of a sudden now I'm the baby face who comes out carrying a mask, putting it on, taking it off. And well, I was surprised you're still the same guy. And, with a very confusing gimmick. And
Forgive me for interrupting, because someone else actually
yeah,
wrote in. Was there any talk about bringing you and Glenn in as a tag team to the WWF? Was that never a
n-
situation?
no, I never heard anything of that.
No.
No. Uh, um, so the gimmick kind of floundered, and then they were trying to find an identity for me that they could sell because that's number one, the number one most important thing. To the point where at one point when WCW started bringing luchadors, they tried to bring in some luchadors themselves, and they weren't getting the ones they were happy with, and they presented me the idea of being the world's greatest Mexican wrestler. I was going to work as a luchador because I had experience doing that as well. But, and I kind of was like, I don't really feel like doing that. And then the Leaf Cassidy thing came up with Marty, and we had I cherished the time that I spent with Marty and had a great run, but then it came to its end, and I was back where I started from, and then I tried to quit and they rolled me over and on my contract. And then I was able to, through Candido and Paul Heyman, be put on loan to ECW.
So I've written a book about Owen Hart called Owen Hart, King of Pranks. It's done very well,
Yes.
if I do say
Yes.
so myself. And I'm going to show
Okay.
this the main camera first of this image, and now I'm going to show you this image. Can you explain what is going on there?
Well, I can't quite see what's in the center between us.
Hang on.
Oh, the skunk. Yeah.
Yes, it's a
Yeah. That was
skunk.
the night that we were in Montreal and there was a skunk on the side of the road and Marty yelled at me to stop the car. And then not thinking, because I just had this conversation that, caught up in the moment. He's like, there's a skunk, stop. So we stop. And I'm like, what do you want to do? And he goes, let's go, let's get it. Let's grab it. We'll release it in the locker room tomorrow. And I'm like, what? And I didn't even think I'd jump out, and we're trying to corral the skunk, which of course we ended up getting partially sprayed. And, it never occurred to me that what am I going to do with it once we get it? How are we going to transport it in the car without it just being a mess? And then where are we going to keep it until the next night that we're going to release it in the locker room? You know what I mean? But that's how Marty's mind worked. And, it was just, he's an interesting fellow.
Did
That's for
you
sure.
did you realize that you were actually getting in the middle of like rib wars between Marty versus Owen Hart and the Bulldog at that time?
No, no, but, that actually, uh, did happen, because we had a pair of gear that Marty didn't like to wear, wasn't flattering. And so the gear that he did like to wear, we know that was Owen Bulldog put a padlock on his singlet, so he couldn't wear it. And he tried everything to get that padlock off, and he couldn't do it, to the point where like we're doing an like 5 or 6 day run, like up in upstate New York and into Maine. Maine was going to be the last. Bangor, Maine was like the last town. And to the point where we were going to we'd went to the gym, and he asked the gym if they had bolt cutters, and, tried to drill it. And he could not get this lock off of his gear. So like one night in Pittsburgh, he got mad, and because to get him back, he called up, because at that time you could call up, and the airport, they didn't ask for identification of any sort, and he literally canceled their flights on the way home. And there was something else. He let all the air out of their tires in the parking lot at Pittsburgh. He was so frustrated because it was like 3 weeks he couldn't get this lock off. And then we were staying in like Albany, New York, and we were going to be at the hotel for like 4 days straight or something. So we go to the grocery store, and he, to save on money, he buys food. And he buys peel and eat shrimp, and he buys them simply so he can keep the baggie full of brine, and he holds on to it like for 4 days. The room smells horrible. We don't figure out why the room smells so bad. We think that there's something in the room that smells bad. Well, it is. It's us with this bag of brine. So we get changed to another room. And then the last night of the tour is Bangor, and Davey and Owen knew something was afoot. So they got dressed in their car, and, and then finally they brought their bags in, and then he grabbed that bag of brine and poured it into their suitcases on their clothes to get him back for putting the padlock on his gear.
I think
We
there was.
got the padlock off because we were in Albany, and we went down to a hardware store, and they had a huge pair of bolt cutters. And I finally was able to cut the lock off of his gear for him. So yeah, and then they would go back and forth a lot as far as ribs were concerned.
With I think there's a dark side of the ring as we record this, coming out on Marty in a few weeks' time, and he's
Yeah,
actually in it as well.
yeah.
I'm not asking for a particularly dark story, but any other particular road stories with Marty? I always loved the fact about Marty that he's been fired by the WWF more times than any other talent, which I just think's
The
wonderful.
only other one is the Sheik. The Sheik is and Marty passed him, by one. I think he beat the Sheik by one. So yeah,
Someone out there has tried to catalog every single time, and it's either 8 or 9 times. And I did
yeah,
my own
it's
research, and I think third is Terry Taylor. Weirdly,
yeah, yeah. And look, as far as dark side of the ring, and here's what I stated I stated every time on an interview. I think that Marty is probably one of the most underappreciated, underrespected professional wrestlers ever in the wrestling business.
mm-hmm.
Because of the fact that he was overshadowed by Sean's success. I think that he's never gotten his proper due of just how really talented and how really good he was. Sean wouldn't have been what he was if it weren't for Marty. Sean just more aggressively backstage went after what he wanted out of his career than Marty did. And Marty was just more self-destructive. That's it. But, guys use that, I don't want to be the Marty Jannetty of the team. Brother, you'd be lucky if you were the Marty Jannetty of that team. You really would, because you're not that good. And Marty was incredible. He was really really a very good athlete, a very good performer. And, you know, from where Marty came from in his life to where Marty went is a remarkable story. And I think they'll go into that on that dark side of the ring a little bit, the challenges. And Marty didn't have it easy. And for him to start literally from dirt poor, nothing, to end up being an international name in the wrestling business is quite a remarkable accomplishment.
Absolutely.
And I learned so much by being with Marty. I was very fortunate to be with him, and that's where I really grew my respect and appreciation for him.
This next question's from me. As a young boy, I used to get every single WWF VHS tape, watch them a million times, when I probably should have been watching porn or whatever at that age. And
it's always a constructive hobby. If you got some time on your hands.
Yeah, definitely. And,
you'll have something else on your hands. Anyways.
You took the words right out of my mouth. And that's so one of them was not one night stand, one night only. It was the first WWF exclusive UK pay-per-view. And this is about the time I started rewatching wrestling, because I think I fell out with it for like 18 months or 2 years, whenever. And you're brought back for one go. Is Ricky there? Did you just
look at Shane?
Oh,
Shane,
right. Oh,
Shane.
I need to say hello to Shane as well.
Shane Douglas.
And you're brought back one time only, even though you're with ECW, to wrestle Tiger Ali Singh.
Yes.
And I remember thinking at the time, watching it when I was like 10 or 11, or whenever it was, poor Al being saddled with Tiger Ali Singh when Tiger's just struggling to do anything.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that was why I was, JR asked me to come back and to help, because they really believed. I remember having the conversation with JR prior to going over there, because there's, I don't need to tell you, I mean, in the UK, there's a huge Indian population in the UK, and they felt very confident that Tiger was going to really help them break in at that time into the UK market and attract that, Indian fan base. And, I remember talking to JR, I was being very frank, and I go, JR, your reasoning is ridiculous. I go, Tiger's okay, he's not great. And I said, but your thought process of, well, he's Indian, so the Indians are going to, the Indian population's going to come to see him. I go, that's not how this works. I go, you could be any particular, race, creed, religion. If you're not good, they're not going to pay to see you. And I go, and let's face it, I don't think Tiger's at that level yet. And he, oh, no. And, it's funny because they talk a lot about, they used to talk a lot about WWO, ECW, you drink, Paul Heyman's Kool-Aid. Let me tell you something. The people that have the biggest bowl of Kool-Aid that you can drink, and it is the most potent and it is the most prevalent, is in WWE. It's insane how, they created an agenda, or Vince has one, and that they now want to support, and they all jump on the old Kool-Aid train and, oh, let's take a sip. And where you can clearly see, that guy ain't what you think he is, but everybody else, Vince thinks he is, so everybody else agrees now he is. And in spite of the reality, we're all going to convince ourselves that, yeah, that's the case.
With you nodding at Shane gave me a really great story about exactly that everyone drinks from the same cup sort of thing. I'm going to give you a bit of a game now. I'm going to give you a bit of a game.
Okay,
Name association. Yeah. We're going to go through it as much as we can until time runs out, I suppose. And if we've got extra time, we'll do a few more questions. Sure. I'm going to give you a sentence. And you give me the first name that comes to your mind when I give you this description of somebody. It can be from any promotion, any locker room.
Sure.
And the first one is the funniest person in the locker room.
The funniest person in the locker room. Boy, there are a lot of funny guys. Funniest guy in the locker room. That would have one of those right off the top of the head. It would be like Midian was hilarious and was kept around really for just locker room morale. I mean, Brad Armstrong was a really funny guy.
Everyone says Brad Armstrong. This might as well be say Brad Armstrong question. Everyone says Brad.
Yeah, Brad, Midian, trying to think of some other ones. Blue Meanie is a very funny, entertaining guy. Um, yeah, those were the ones come right off the top of my head.
The most beautiful lady performer in real life.
Uh, well, when Sable showed up, she really made an impression in the locker room. I mean, she would walk through and everyone would stop. I mean, that was without a doubt. She was, as far as physical attractiveness, I mean, she epitomized it. As far as just beautiful woman, I mean, all the girls really, I mean, they were all terrific people and, awesome in and out of the ring and, um, yeah, and of course, clearly, I mean, they're physically attractive as well. So
Next one, smelliest wrestler.
smelliest. Back in the Smoky Mountain days, for sure, was Balls Mahoney when he was Boo Bradley.
Might as well
He
just call that the
was,
Balls Mahoney question.
yeah, he was basically, frankly, he was disgusting. Yeah, at that time, we rode one time. Glenn Jacobs driving this whole beat up car, and Killer Kyle was working a program at the time in the territory with Boo with Balls Mahoney, and he refused to wash his gear because Balls smelled so bad. He was going to get him back, and he was not going to wash his gear. So the two of them stunk to high heaven, and it's me, Ricky Morton, sitting in between me, and Balls is on the other side, and Balls has got his arm up and around Ricky. And when when we get out of the car and we go in the locker room, Ricky's whole right side smelled like Balls' armpit. He was so mad, and he had to go and take a shower because he had to get the stench off of him. It was, if you wrestled him and you walked back to the locker room, you now had that odor, that stench on you from him. Yeah, he was pretty bad at that time.
So that should be the Balls Mahoney, Vader, or Buddy Roberts.
Oh, Vader too. Vader was, oh yeah, he smelled like, rotten bologna.
Worst abuser of spray tan or baby oil? Who would just?
That would be probably Robbie E. Was probably one of the worst I'd ever seen as far as spray tan. Now there was a kid that I did the dark match with in WCW who actually covered himself in Pam cooking spray, non-stick cooking spray. So it was like grabbing a greased hot dog. It was just shot out everywhere. Yeah, but Robbie E with Impact Wrestling would probably, as far as spray tan was concerned.
Wrestler who turned up most late to shows.
Oh, that list is probably one of the ones. Probably Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were probably pretty notorious for doing that.
What am I going to ask now? I've got a million of these. The stiffest or most reckless wrestler you ever was in the ring with?
Stiffest or most reckless? Because there's a difference between being stiff or working snug and being reckless.
Well, I'll be specific then. Let's say reckless. Just hit you in the wrong places.
Boy, there's a lot of those. A lot of those guys would, unfortunately, these days. On an upper type of level in WWE or higher levels like that, there wasn't anybody that was really reckless. They were they were all capable professionals. Now you get out on the independents, it's a free for all. There are a lot of guys that are very, very careless and very dangerous.
The hardest deliverer of chair shots or weapon shots in general?
Hardest, being hit hardest with a chair or a weapon. Well, I can take pride in the fact that I gave Tommy Dreamer his first concussion with a plastic chair. I didn't even hit him in the head; I hit him in the back, and he swears that I gave him his first concussion with a plastic chair.
Did he give him like whiplash or something with it? Or
I guess, yeah. I hit him so hard it caused his head to snap or something. Balls, Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney, when they would hit you with a chair, like Zowie would be written across your forehead. Like it was like, I remember one time we were at a baseball park working a ECW show, and it was Axel's spot. That was his gimmick, and it was kind of like a heel in the match, and I knew, that's what the audience wanted. And like an idiot, I called it, and I had him hit me with the chair, and it hurt so bad. I screamed, rolled out of the ring, and ran the bases, like holding my head, not as like a spot. Like I legitimately was running around waiting for my head to stop hurting. And I literally felt as my hand was there, I felt this knot just start raising on the top of my head. I looked like a goddamn unicorn. I was like, I will never, and I mean, I could not emphasize the word never do that again, ever. I will not willingly call, hey, pick up a chair and hit me with the head, in the head, Axel. No, it was insane how bad that hurt. And I had been hit with chairs before, and I was like, that ain't gonna happen again. There won't be a second time on that.
With that being said, with head injuries, what's the worst concussion you've ever had? With maybe like just time just disappeared.
Probably the worst concussion I ever had was because I've had quite a few. Um, Probably in Japan, I was working shoot fight matches for Kitao Dojo for Koji Kitao, and I had to. It was like a tournament. I had to fight twice that night, and was fighting a young karate guy, and he literally it's called an axe kick, but he did a forward flip and then was going to hit me here, caught me here in the jaw, and they said that it sounded like a gun went off. I was out on the floor, like I couldn't hear anything. It was just I wasn't unconscious, like completely blacked out, but I was unconscious without being unconscious,
Jeez.
and was trying to cuss, and I realized my jaw was dislocated, so popped my jaw back in. That hurt, and then. And I'm looking up, and there's Wally Yamaguchi, who's the referee. Is like, come on, baby, you get it, because I was supposed to go over. So I get back in the ring and I finish the fight, and I get in. This is in Korakuen Hall, and I get downstairs, and I can't find the dressing room. Like I wander around, like they had to come find me because I had to go back out, and I forget the guy's name. I had to work with a guy from War Wrestling Romance Tenrus Group, and we were going to do an angle at the end where we were going to brawl around the building, and we get in, and we're about to start, and he open hand strikes me right in the same place I had just been kicked, and clicked my jaw back out. I had to pop it back in, and I'm just and somehow go through the whole match, finish the fight, and I'm supposed to, at least this is what I've been told, I can't remember. I'm supposed to attack him, I'm supposed to fight and shoot this angle. I just get down on my knees and stare at him. And he gets on his knees, and we just stare at each other, and then we leave. And apparently I went out that night. We went to dinner, and I was the life of the party and had a great time. Brother, I don't remember to this day none of that. I woke up the next morning in my bed in the hotel. Didn't know how I got there. Don't remember ever going out. Don't remember having dinner. Don't remember jokes, nothing. And was just, I was in my hotel, woke up, and got ready to go to the airport and leave, and still don't remember the rest of that night.
Jeez.
But I was apparently functioning and was just having a blast.
You had a good time, so they said.
Apparently I did, yeah. So it was almost, I guess, like a blackout drunk or something.
This next one is sort of the opposite, smoothest worker you've ever wrestled.
Although, not saying because he's here, but like Shane Douglas would be on that list. Candido, Benoit, several, lots of guys. Just like a night off.
What else? I'll skip it down a few. Biggest ladies man.
Oh, thanks. biggest ladies man, Marty Jannetty. I bet he. Oh, sorry, Shane. Biggest ladies man, unquestionably. I mean, he's got a higher body count than Ric Flair. I said that on Dark Side of the Ring, and the producer was like, "What? No way." I'm like, "Oh, no." When Marty and Sean were real, and look, this isn't Marty and Sean telling me this. This is the boys. This was back in the '80s when we were working 7 nights a week. They were out on the road, 300 days a year. And like they get done, they go to the hotel, and there were women in the hallway, sitting in the hallway, waiting to take their turn to get in the room. Lines up. They just walk out and pick one, just pick another one. You know,
Yeah.
and I've been to Marty's home, his old home in Orlando, Florida, where he had boxes of photographs and photo albums full of just absolutely drop dead gorgeous women that he had been with.
Polaroid.
You know,
Polaroid at the
Polaroid,
time.
Polaroid, yeah, and just photographs, yeah, yeah.
You must have got that from Gene Simmons. I believe that he did that as well.
I have no idea, but I'm telling you, Marty was, when it came to women, is still to this day remarkable.
So I'll tell you this very. Apparently, Gene Simmons used to do the Polaroid thing, but he'd always make him put the hands over the head as well. I think it's just to see just how fantastic the boobies were. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know
maybe that could be. I don't know. Yeah.
The loudest spot caller.
I don't. No one directly comes to mind off of that. Can't think of anybody, because you'd have to be outside the ring to be able to hear it. You know what I mean? So I really couldn't tell you.
Best and worst road agents.
Worst road agent in the sense that I don't think it was really what he was cut out to do, was George Steele. Just wasn't his forte. One of the best, I think, was Terry Taylor. Terry Taylor was a guy that, like, you could come to and go, "Hey Terry, I'm thinking about trying to do this," and he would offer suggestions or thoughts or ideas on how you could pull it off. Like one night, I'm going to work with Kristen Winsky, and I'm like, I want to go out there and I literally want to make one singular punch mean everything. Like I want to use that one punch to elicit such a reaction that right out of that we can take the match home, and then that will get Chris heat. That was the objective. And like he's like, well, do this, do that, maybe that, and we talked back and forth. And then I was, it's on Raw. It was broadcast. And I was able to pull it off. I was able to just throw one single punch and the place just lit up, because we had built the heat, the want, that desire to see it happen throughout the match. And then when I finally delivered it, got the people at a point where we could just go home.
It's funny, I actually interviewed Rip Rogers a month ago, if that, and he extolled the virtues of making one punch mean everything as well. And I was just throwing the fishing rod out, and I didn't even have to bait the line. I knew what he was. Yeah, I knew he'd just like come out with a diatribe and said, "What do you think of the 10 punches in the corner?" It's like, God damn, he just went straight off.
Yeah.
Just because you mentioned Terry Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's going to be probably a fairly simple answer and everything, but why wasn't Terry just a bigger star in general? Because he always seemed like he had everything.
He did. Terry had everything. It's just sometimes it's either you're just missing that one little intrinsic thing that you can't put your finger on, or it's the fact that the wrestler themselves is their own worst enemy, because they I think two things that held Terry a little bit back was, one, describe him to me in a sentence or less. Give me a definable character trait that he had. Okay. And that right there, to be a star, is unquestionably is the absolute most vital thing that you have to have. You have to be able to turn to your friends and family and be able to go, "Oh, there's this guy and he's A, B, C, D, E." Shane and I were talking about it last night. Like that was one of the things that made ECW what it was that everyone on that show you could describe. Every person had a character. If you really think about it, and everybody, goes on and on about the Attitude Era, well, the reason that it was so popular and that you enjoyed it so much is because every person on that show, everyone meant something, and everyone was somebody you could describe. Well, being able to describe someone means that they are an attraction. Being an attraction means that they are a star. And so every single person on that show, from bottom to top, were stars. Everyone in ECW at the time when it was really hot, every one of them were stars. Because think about it, every one of them you could describe in a sentence or less to your friends and family. If they are somebody that you can't describe, that you can't just, it doesn't invoke uh, your imagination and your passion and a description, they're a great performer, but they're not a great star.
Mm.
In the 80s, when wrestling was uber hot, super hot, right? Because some couldn't dare, oh, well, Attitude Era was much more successful. Not really. I mean, yeah, of course, financially, because there were other avenues and other streams of revenue, and that they didn't have in the 80s. You think about it. In the 80s, they didn't run Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They ran Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they got to a point where they were selling out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then they were running A and B towns on Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And then some weekends on a Saturday, they would run an A, B, and a C town. You know, that's 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 pretty strong business. You know what I mean? Pretty strong. And that was all predicated off of the fact that from start to finish, you could know who these people were, relate to who they were, describe them to your friends, and then care about whether or not they won or lost based on their identities.
I
And
yeah,
that's the most important thing.
I don't know if you like this or not. When Matt Groening was designing The Simpsons, he wanted
Mhm,
to design them like Batman. You could tell from the
mhm.
silhouette exactly who they are. And I sort of
Yes.
think that was the same with the wrestlers, the WWF wrestlers of the 80s and 90s golden eras, because you could tell who they were just by the silhouette, whether it was Savage or
Mhm,
Beefcake or whoever it may be. You knew exactly who they were, let alone describe them in a sentence, really concisely.
mhm.
I'm
And
going
they
to
were all distinct. They were all different.
exactly.
They all, and not just from a presentation standpoint of gear or promos, but their style in the ring was definitively different than the other 10 or 12 or 15 guys that were on the show. They stood out. And that, I'm not bagging on modern wrestling, but that's a big part of what's missing today. Is you can't, tell me, one describe Seth Rollins to me. You know what I mean? To where I, a casual fan, go, oh well shit, I want to watch this guy.
I'm going to ask you one more out of this little game, and then
Sure, yeah.
we've actually got some time for some fan questions again as well.
Sure, yeah.
The most memorable backstage fight.
Most memorable backstage fight was probably the one that took place between Sean and Brett, because there was such a build up to it, and you knew there was a real personal heat there, and these guys were like to the point where they were crossing the line on TV. You always want, like, if there's some actual heat there, and Jerry Jarrett always said it best, is he yeah, yeah, if you want boys, if you want them to believe a lie, you got to tell them a little bit of the truth, and that would always draw money because people can sense the truth in it. And that there was a lot of truth, but they were starting to go way overboard. Sean making remarks about Brett that literally got Brett heat with his wife and his family, and you can go too far, and that's what resulted in that big fight. And Brett like snatched Sean bald, like there was literally not bald like now where he's lost his hair, but there was years later there was a bald spot on the side of Sean's head where Brett had snatched the hair out of his head in that fight. I mean, that was pretty good.
Do you know what happened to the hair? I do.
Probably. Do you?
I do know
Because it
exactly
would
what happened to the hair.
what?
Jim Cornette picked it up, put it in a baggie, and showed it to his wife, and he still has it somewhere.
Oh, he probably does. No one Cornette, yeah, probably does. Yeah, yeah. He literally snatched a chunk of hair out of his head, and it was that never grew back. Never.
With well, it's all right. The rest of the hair caught up with it eventually. That's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The rest of it all decided, hey, they took off early. Let's leave too.
I know this is a hard question to answer, but who was the
Mm,
better worker, Brett or Sean?
mm. Who was the better worker, Brett or Sean? I'd have to say they're both pretty even in that regard. Just different approaches.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Brett
With
was more no nonsense, just very, I'm here to win, you know, and Sean was more flourish and more, you know, spe- I'm going to win, but I'm going to do it spectacularly, you know. Sean was better at looking like he was in jeopardy of losing, and Brett was better at selling the intent that he was attempting to win.
I always thought Brett had better punches, and that sort of just that generally always seals an argument for me is who punches better.
Yeah, I think well, Brett kind of threw more realistic ones. Yeah, I think Brett was more adept at selling the intent to win, and I think Sean was more adept at selling the I'm trying not to lose.
Mm. I
So,
like to attempt to occasionally guess what you're going to say for an answer. So for the fight, I genuinely thought you were going to say Bradshaw versus Steve Blackman. So I had it in my notes somewhere
oh,
that somehow you got in the middle of it.
oh yeah, well yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah, that was in Kansas City at the airport.
Mm.
Bradshaw had been. This was during the brawl for all, where what's such a horrible idea that one night in State College, Pennsylvania, when they had having it going on, the fans all in unison started chanting, "We want fake." That was how bad that was. And Bradshaw was, double legging Steve in the airports and screaming 10 points and running away and was goosing him. And Steve kept telling him, stop doing it. I'm gonna, and listen, how two guys go, look, I'm gonna kill you if you don't stop doing that. When Steve says, I'm gonna kill you, like he's probably gonna murder you. I'm not kidding. And he has the capabilities to do it. So, and he's an awesome guy. I love Steve. So we're standing there and, I'm across uh, the baggage claim carousel. And and I look up and I see Bradshaw. He's behind Steve, and he gooses him. And Steve, turns around, cuts promo on him, and he does it again. And uncannily, I don't know how he did it, but Blackman spins, hits him with a back fist right here underneath the right eye, follows it with a left, hits the exact same spot. I mean, just big boom like that. And Bradshaw like staggers back and grabs Blackman's shirt. And Blackman now just proceeds with his left hand to continuously pelt the exact same spot. I mean, he just keeps hitting the spot, and Bradshaw's trying to grab him. Chaos erupts. They're pushing into people. They almost slam into this old senior citizen couple, and and Steve's trying. Bradshaw's trying to hit him, and Steve just got his arm up there and just bang, bang. He must have hit him at least 12 to 15 times in this very short amount of time. And I'm just standing there like, oh, well, let him fight. Right. And Shamrock's standing there and he's just grinning. Ken's he don't care. And uh, then I see Steve take a step back and I know what he's about to do because he's going to kick Bradshaw's knees out from under him. He's going to break his knees. And and Bradshaw better thank God. Steve steps back and there's a duffel bag and he puts his foot right through the handle and he goes to kick and I see him look and I was like, oh, he's going to cripple him. So I don't know how to this day. I jumped and landed on the edge of the carousel, right on the rail, and ran across the rail, jumped in between, grabbed Steve, and at the same time, Darren Drozdov was coming from the other side and grabbing Bradshaw. And, I'm trying to get Steve away from him. And I'm like, just wait till we get to the building. Wait till we get to the building. You can take him in a room and beat the shit out of him. Just wait till we get to the building. There's witnesses. There's witnesses. So it was the only thing I could say that I knew would calm him down. Right. So as we're walking out of the airport, Steve keeps, Bradshaw's trying to talk to him, and Steve goes, I'm gonna fucking kill you. I want you to know when we get to the building, I'm going to fucking kill you. Right. So then Bradshaw is at the building and keeps coming up to Steve and is trying to apologize. And Steve's like, no, I'm telling you right now, I'm going to beat your ass. I'm going to, I'm going to mess you up. And Bradshaw now goes, look, what do I need to do? And Steve goes, you know what, you're going to stand up in the catering and you are going to apologize to me in front of everybody. Because if you don't, and you stutter, you take a misstep, I'm going to beat your ass in front of everybody there in that room. And he goes, and we're in catering. Tim Bradshaw stood up, and I want to apologize to Steve Blackman. I was unprofessional, and I took things too far, and I'm really sorry, Steve. And Steve went, okay, and then sat down. It was it. It was over.
That's remarkably similar to the way Val Venus told it as well, because I think he's went, you've got to apologise, and Bradshaw was like, fine, let's do it. Like immediately.
Yeah, we immediately went to catering, and Bradshaw in front of everybody was, I was unprofessional. I took things too far. I shouldn't have done that. And I am sorry, Steve. It'll never happen again. Because Steve just refused to accept any apology from him until then.
It's got to be the best fight story ever. In the remaining time we have, it's not too long. I think we'll get 2 or 3 questions, and then I will thank you so much for your time. Unless Big Chris Hone's interview behind you, and then I'll know that that's really time to wrap up. Let me have a look at what I'm going to ask here. I've got so many things. Oh, there's Kennel from Hell, there's Hardcore Holly, there's all the stuff from the 90s. Al, will you be getting a Mattel action figure, and have you signed a Legends deal with WWE?
No to both those. I mean, they had expressed, I'd seen the guys that handle the Mattel action figures, and they really want to do one, but in order to get one, I guess you got to sign a Legends deal, and I don't see that on the horizon anytime soon. No. So I don't consider myself a legend.
Yeah, but I think you'd more than qualify, surely, for a Legends deal. You don't have to be in the Hall of Fame or anything.
I'm old enough, so.
Of all the merchandise that's ever come out, I know there was that famous one. Your first figure was taken off the shelves at Walmart because some idiot.
Yeah, hell, I was canceled before cancel culture became a thing.
Crazy.
I'm always ahead of the curve.
Of all the merch that has come out, which is most special to you, and which made you the most money?
Probably the action figures. I mean, being in video games and just any of that stuff is amazing, and it's a little piece of immortality. The other not too long ago, I found, I didn't even know it was out. I found a Christmas ornament that they made that had my picture on it. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So every one of those things, I've got all, like, as many of that stuff as I can find. I've got saved at home, put away, because it's a big deal, to get those things, and it's very complimentary, and like I said, like a little piece of immortality. I just had an action figure released over there in the UK with Wrestling Trader, the Cello Toys action figure, and it's awesome to have that. And then I just signed a deal for like a Hasbro style action figure that a company here in the United States wants to make, and then when ECW had them, one made like that as well, that style. So I'm very flattered that they want to do it, and I've just signed. I'm in 2 different video games I'd signed a deal with as a character, and there's a third one that somebody had just approached me about that they want my character in as well. So that's thrilling. I mean, it's cool to do that, and especially because I've got like 7 grandkids now. I'm literally part of the overpopulation problem by myself. I have 6 kids and 7 grandkids, so and I'm it's cool to be able to show that to those guys, to them. They think that's the greatest thing in the world to them, is that they see those things, and now I'm suddenly kind of cool. I'm not just grumpy old grandpa.
Who owned the rights to the Job Squad T-shirt? Because didn't it debut in ECW? Oh, you do?
Yeah, I do. Mm-hmm.
So
That's my original intellectual property.
Oh, right. So you created the logo and everything in ECW. Was there any issues with WWF selling those T-shirts? Did you have to sign anything over?
I'd signed a licensing deal, and like I explain all the time to people, like everything we've talked about today, about appealing to not the niche audience but the mass audience, right? So let's use the Job Squad shirts, right? So the period of time that I was in ECW and I made Job Squad shirts, I did very well, made a lot of money with those in ECW just from May of that year to like October of that year. I probably sold more than upwards of 3,500 t-shirts, $25 a piece. Now this was back in the 90s, and that was in the only avenue I had to sell them, the internet. But you had to like send in a check, and you know what I mean. It wasn't like today where you could just Venmo or PayPal, and commerce was not that simple. And then I sold them at the shows. So I probably sold close to 3,500 t-shirts in a matter of May to October. $25 a shirt, significant. So you, as a performer, you can make a choice. Because when I went back to WWE, I had done so well, and they knew about how well I'd done it. They signed a licensing deal with me for the Job Squad shirts. Well, if you notice, they never got sold. The reason they never got sold is because the people in the marketing department would call me up on a regular basis, and they're like, they didn't know how to sell it to the average person. The wrestling audience, the niche audience, the hardcore wrestling fans understood it, appealed to them, they got it, and they therefore bought them. But the average Mr. and Mrs. Walmart, Mr. and Mrs. Tesco, no idea. How can you describe Job Squad and what the humor is and what it means? You can't. So you can choose that if you want, because it's 100% your choice. You could be Job Squad successful, which is made money, or you could be Stone Cold Steve Austin successful, which is where his shirts were in not just Hot Topic or Spencer's. They were in literally every retail outlet in the mall in the United States. They were in every Walmart. They were in every Target. They were at fairs, flea markets. They were everywhere. And he made millions of dollars off of those t-shirts. So do you want to, appeal to the niche audience, market yourself to the niche audience, perform in a way that only that niche audience can relate to? Or do you want to do it to where everyone does? And the choice is yours. You'll be successful, absolutely. But will you be Steve Austin successful, or Hulk Hogan successful, or will you be Job Squad successful? Choice is yours.
I can actually see this guy's name, Doug Eaton, because it's right at the bottom. It's in the light. Did you enjoy your short feud with The Rock in 1999? And that actually leads me to another question. Why was it so short?
Yeah, I thought we did a great job together. I thought we had good chemistry. And why was I don't know. I mean, I was not ever made privy to any of that kind of, decision making process. I have no idea. I'm sure I probably dropped the ball in some manner.
Well, actually, there's a quote I want to give you. Not a quote, but sort of general. Jim Ross stated in his second book that he was such a big fan of yours that he would constantly bring your name up in creative meetings. And apparently, without you knowing this, it ended up working against you because Jim Ross was just pushing for you so much. Did you?
Yeah, and Cornette had said it as well. Yeah, Cornette had said that as well. And I'm flattered that JR was such a fan of mine. I really, because to have that kind of respect by somebody like JR means a lot to me. And I'm just thrilled that he was pushing for me. Did it work conversely and not it worked against me? Well, yeah, but still I'm honored and flattered that he thought that much of me to speak up for me on my behalf.
I'm just trying to look through whatever questions we can get through before and it's so frustrating. There's got to be a part 2 in here. There's a part 8 in here. As you say, not great with dates and everything. Were you joining OVW when Jim Cornette was still there?
Yeah, yeah, I did. I came down and was just beginning, and then shortly after was the incident with Santino Marella. Um, he at that time going under a Russian shoot fighter gimmick, Boris, and uh, uh, that was when Jimmy got released from his position with the developmental program.
Ultimately, this is just relating to OVW, but were you more of a Jim Cornette guy or a Paul Heyman guy as far as training the
Both,
talents? Yeah.
both, both. I think Cornette and Heyman are literally opposite sides of the same coin. I think they take different approaches, but they, at the end of the day, they very much know how to go about it, how to manage talent, how to direct it, how to get the most out of it, and how to do business. They just have different styles about doing it, and but they're both very adept at doing it.
I'll may end on this then. Why weren't you at ECW One Night Stand?
I don't know. I know that initially I was supposed to. I'd heard that I was going to wrestle Candido in a match, Chris Candido, and then I think Chris got hurt and wasn't able to perform. And then as a result, there wasn't a spot on the card. They didn't have a spot on the card. It's funny because it's really interesting because like uh, I don't think I'm really considered an ECW guy. And to that point, I don't really think I necessarily am considered a WWE guy either. And nobody's really, they don't reference me when it comes to either one of those, you know, groups. So, like certain guys, you identify them with a particular company, I don't think I've ever been slotted like that, as, oh, he's this company guy, you know, um, certainly not from the early part of my career because most people don't know all the companies that I used to work for back in those days. They're not even aware of them. And but yeah, the ECW, I don't think I'm considered I am, but I'm not like, guys like Shane and Taz and Dreamer that, they're identified with, you know, that
Were you always under WWF contract even when you were in ECW?
yes. Yeah, I was that circumstance. I had, signed a 2-year deal with an option for a third year initially when I'd signed my WWF contract. And I got, and it, through my own fault, fault of my own and, my own frustrations, I got to a point where, but I knew, knowing the business at the point in time that I did, that if I stayed there, I was not going to go anywhere. It was not going to change. I had to leave and I had to go somewhere else so that they could see me from the outside and get a different perception. And, so I tried to quit. You had to, at that time, you had to put in note, written notice 90 days in advance. And they rolled my contract over, which didn't make my attitude any better. And then one day Candido came with Paul Heyman, which we weren't aware at the time that, Vince was working with Paul Heyman so closely. And they were at TV and Candido and I talked, and, Chris went to Paul went to Bruce Pritchard. And the next thing I know, I was put on loan in ECW. And, um, and I knew when I went, like, Paul had no plans for me. He had no distinct idea or anything. He didn't care. He was doing it to work with Bruce and with WWE. And, so I went and, I knew I had to get myself over in a way that either Paul would pay to keep me or Eric Bischoff would pay to take me or, Vince would ask, bring me back. This is Paul disputes this, but it's the truth. Uh, I got over, thank God, to the grace of God and a plastic head, I got over. And I was happy, you know. I got to do what I wanted to do and the way I wanted to do it. And, you know, um, Vince Russo reached out to me and wanted me to, send something, send a tape, so he could show Vince and all this. And I go, no, I'm fine where I'm at. I'm happy. And then like a couple weeks later, we're in Orlando, Florida, and I see the open to the new show, right? And I'm nowhere on it at all. And usually on the open of the show are the ones you're spotlighting, highlighting, you know what I mean? Trying to give you're pushing a little bit. I was like, well, that doesn't bode well. I don't, I can see the handwriting on the wall here. So I called Russo back up and I was like, well, things kind of have changed. I'd be open to it. So send it to him and, and then, a couple weeks later, Vince called me up and I thought Nova, Mike Bucci was ribbing me when Vince called. And, yeah, sure. It's Vince McMahon, fuck off. And then he's no, really, Al, it's me. And when the way he said it, I went, oh shit, that's Vince. And then
he must get that all the time, though. He
must
get that all the time.
So we talked again, and I just went, okay, I'll come back. And he said, JR, I'll get with you. And I was like, okay. And then I went back. So both times that I was brought in, Vince brought me in to WWE. Nobody else did.
I will end on this. David says, ask him about when Test kicked head into the audience. I think it was on an ECW WWE broadcast.
Yeah, Test kicked head into the audience, and I think that was because he never and I'm not making excuses, and it was my own fault. I should have had conversations with Vince. I should have had conversations with creative, but I would show up at TV the entire time I was in WWF, WWE. I'd show up. I didn't know ever, and I mean, I cannot emphasize the word ever, knew what I was doing prior to getting into that building. Never. And when they came and spoke to me, they never gave me details of what they wanted, why they wanted it, what they were hoping to do, where they were wanting to go. Nothing. Literally not one, only one time did I ever have a conversation like that. And that was with Vince Russo when he came to me with the whole Pepper and Kennel from Hell idea. And we can go into that conversation if you want. It won't take long. But never. I literally would show up for pre-tapes. Like I showed up one time and was going to wear a suit and wear a Vince McMahon mask and go out and interact with Vince McMahon. And no one told me what the hell I was doing or why the fuck I was doing it. I went out there blind. Now, again, my fault, didn't ask. You know what I mean? Nobody explained to me anything, any match. I had a cage match once, did a pre-tape with Hunter and Stephanie, and I was having a cage match with Jeff Hardy where I was to put Marlena in the ring with me, and Matt Hardy was to come down, and I was going to keep him from making the save, and Jeff was going to escape. Why? When did this happen? Why did this occur? Why am I now in a cage match with Jeff Hardy on Raw? Last week I was just working with somebody else, and no conversation, nobody, no writers called me during the week and, hey, here's what we're looking to do. Nothing.
So
I'm telling you, literally, and Tess was told to kick the head and I think that was just like when, Albert put the spike through it. I think they were, again, now with time and distance, I could say I think they were trying to kill the gimmick because it had gotten such a backlash from that, being canceled from, and they were trying to put it in a direction. Nobody came and told me, hey, we would like to go a different direction with you and do something else. Nobody. They just did stuff to the head, and guess what? You couldn't fucking kill them. It was, they were like a vampire, even after Albert tried to put a railroad spike through it, I just brought it back out again, and kept doing it. And nobody told me to stop. They never said, well, no, we'd like to go a different way. I never had those conversations. I'm telling you, the only conversation I was with Vince Russo that one time about Pepper and about the Kennel from Hell, nothing else.
So you never.
And I want to point out, when I had that conversation, the words that came out of my mouth right from the very start and for the months of build to that stupid match we're going to get trained animals, correct? We're going to get highly trained animals now. And I was specific. All right. I was like highly trained animals, all from the same training camp, all under verbal direction, because you can train the dogs on verbal command to do things. They're all going to be trained to operate on verbal commands, because I'm envisioning you have trainers standing outside the cell verbally commanding these dogs who are now inside the cell like sharks surrounding the ring. Oh, yeah, we're going to do that every week. Let me tell you, I cannot unequivocally let you know how much every single week I reiterated that request. And when I showed up in Charlotte, North Carolina, I noticed there were about 8 to 10 dogs with 8 to 10 different owners. And I found out they had just reached out that day to a veterinarian clinic and got a list of owners who had Rottweilers. And one of them had some obedience training. And lo and behold, what a surprise. It was a shitball of a match. Why? Because you literally built the entire crux of the story around these animals that you couldn't utilize because they were urinating, fornicating, and defecating so much you couldn't show them on TV. To where two owners were exchanging phone numbers for puppy rights of the dogs. They were fucking while they were on pay-per-view.
What was the original finish of that? Did you have to like improvise after? I'm
Yeah,
sure you couldn't actually go out to the floor.
That was the idea. You had to escape. And you know, they had a deal where Bossman had a guard under his shirt, and he was going to get bit by one of the dogs, and then while the dog had a hold of him, I was going to escape and get out of the cage. That was the idea, and it was just, you know, and granted, I mean, you know, regardless of what the circumstances are, you got to take shit and make shoe polish, and that's just at the the end of the day. But you know, even Vince apologized to me afterwards. Oh, we'll make it up to you. Never did. You know, that's and and again, I take responsibility because once I go out there, I got to make the best of what no matter what the platform is you're given.
Was it always part of the plan to try and snip the top of the Hell? This was years ago. I remember watching it, but was it always part of the plan to try and snip out some of the top of the cell and then climb out that way?
I can't. I think so. I think it was a lot of that was improvised because we were really in a bad spot because we literally, were put in a position. And look, I'm the one that gets all the heat for this thing. Ray was in there with me. Okay. Bossman was just equally as responsible. So we were both put in a terrible position. The entire angle, the entire story, the entire match, the entire gimmick was all built around these animals. And look, even people in porn know you can't work with children or animals because they will always upstage you. And these dogs certainly upstaged us. There was nothing we could do. We were dealt a really, really shitty hand.
Pepper was chip trained though, or was that just someone's dog as well?
Pepper was somebody's dog. I literally, even the Chihuahua, I said, you're going to get me a trained animal to interact with. I need a trained animal to interact with so that I can do things. Brought me again in Detroit, contacted a veterinarian clinic and brought me a dog that, they had found an owner, had a Chihuahua puppy. And the whole idea of that was, Vince had went and seen the movie Son of Sam, and where the killer was hearing voices from the dog and that he was talking to the dog. And the idea was I would hear voices from this dog and speak to him and, interact with him like it was a person. And then it was all based off of that. And Mr. Fuji, which is a real story, apparently had a neighbor with a dog he hated and hated the neighbor and basically killed the dog and fed it to his neighbor for dinner one night. And that's a true story. And that was the whole idea, was that, Bossman would kidnap my dog and then, feed it to me. And then we'd pay it off in this, from hell match. And I kept going. We need trained animals. Oh yeah, we'll get them. And then I show up and, and they've got, just random animals with random owners. That the biggest high spot they had with the dogs that involved the dogs was as they were running out, the overweight owner tripped on the rug and big splashed his own dog. So
I just to say,
I'll always cherish that memory.
On what you said before, is I used to do a podcast with Don Morocco, and he's told me many Fuji stories where he fed people their own pets. So it
Oh,
wasn't just once. It was quite. Generally, he
uh,
used to catch strays and then
mm,
just serve them up. And just before I close out this podcast, because I had the Iggy, the big thumbs up to
from
go home, whose telephone number was it that you held up on Raw and said, please call this number if you find Pepper?
oh, that was Val Venus's. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. I held it up on Sunday Night Heat, and it didn't really get a lot of response. And then Russo came to me again. We were in Boston, and he's like, "Hey, you got to make that poster again." I go, "I do." He goes, "Yeah, and we're going to do a backstage promo with you on live TV." Yeah. So the camera guy and I were, yeah, I went, "Listen, every time I point at this number, I want you to zoom in. Every time I put," he goes, "Why?" I go, "Just it's a phone number. Just," when he goes, "Whose number is it?" I go, "It's Val's." So, you know, so every time in about 2:30 in the morning, we're getting something to eat, and all of a sudden ring, and Val's like, "You son of a bitch." He put my phone number on Raw, and he had thousands of phone calls, literally thousands of phone calls.
Poor fella, poor fella. Listen, I'm going
Yeah.
to shut the podcast. Thank you so much. There's a part two. I'll get in touch with you with a part two if you want to do it.
Yes.
Before
Yeah.
before I let you go, hit me with some plugs. I see the OVW T-shirt. We've mentioned Self Help, the book.
Yep.
Any others?
Yeah, you can check out OVW on Fight TV. You can go to OVW or OVWrestling.com if you want more information on that. We're live every Thursday night from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. On Fight. And that's Eastern time. If you are interested in the training school, it's the only accredited by the State Office of Proprietary Education as a trade school for professional wrestling, sports entertainment, and broadcasting in the world. You can go to ovwacademy.com. You can get more information on that. And if you want to follow me on social media, follow me at The Real Al Snow, because yes, there are some fakes out there. And listen, if you're one of those people that are going to fake being me, I'm simply going to message you and go, look, aim the bar higher. Seriously. Like, if you want to be a fake being a celebrity, why not be like Brad Pitt or George Clooney or something? Not Al Snow. So, um, and if you are interested in my comic book, you can go to brokeniconcomics.com. I have team up books with Chavo Guerrero Jr. It's in a Western that we do. It's the wrestling characters, but in a different uh, place, like Tommy Dreamer and I are in a like Prohibition era style story with gangsters, pretty dark. Scotty 2I and I are in a almost like a John Wick assassin type story. So they're true to the characters, but they're just put in different circumstances. So they're really fun. Go to brokeniconcomics.com.
There you go. Professionally done as well. Let me tell you, most people can't
Yes,
remember
they are.
any of their social medias or anything. You can rattle them all off. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you again for whenever the next one is. And thank you, Al, for joining us for so long and
Thank you.
regaling us so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time.